Damn, son, where'd you find this? King Majora ate it again, buddy boyos. It's over. Over and out. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is King Majora. Here, look, and now I wanted to speak to you today about something that's kind of like the threading meta-narrative of all of my video rants thus far, and you can find them on my page, and be sure to like and subscribe wherever you are at, please. But anyway, excuse me, I wanted to speak today about the nature of politics, and specifically the aspects of the terminally online society and the nature of propaganda and the media, more than anything of left, right, or in between. And I had the idea for this video actually rewatching one of my older rant videos of it's on my YouTube, and I do believe it was in the God of War 2018. Basically the whole God of War franchise is goy slop, and I've explained why. Basically it's a product of media. And I briefly touched on what inspired me for this video, which is Joaquin Phoenix Joker, okay? And I want to shout out Anti-Logic, the YouTuber, because he basically had the same thoughts I had, and he formulated a video way before I did, so I wanted to give credit to that, because even though I came to the same conclusions, I also seen it on this guy's video. And it's talking about how basically, even before the Joker 2 movie, which was a disaster, with, I think it was what was that, Lady Gaga? I can't even remember. My opinion on the Joker movie, before I even explain it, is I was not a fan of the movie at all. In fact, it was completely boring and utterly just I don't feel some sort of type of way about people with mental illnesses. I've had misdiagnoses my whole life about things that they said about me just for being eccentric, and basically I'm desensitized to the concepts. I had a legal system. Basically my defense played that on the little bit I had as a child, and it didn't work, obviously. I mean, I got in trouble. I punched Secret Service, but it's like, and you think that's crazy. It's like, I'm tangenting too much. So basically the Joker movie does not have the Joker in it, at all. The Joaquin Phoenix Joker is absolutely not the Joker at all. He's, as the Anti-Logic YouTuber said, Forrest Gump, Hannibal Lecter. And I had a similar thought. This guy cannot compete with the likes of Batman, the intellect of Lex Luthor, or the Justice League like Cyborg. Joaquin Phoenix Joker could never translate into the actual DC universe, and he stands as like an artsy-fartsy, stupid little film about contemporary society, but placed in what it seems to be like the 70s, more or less. I mean, I don't know exactly the era that movie is supposed to represent, but it's more like this is a severely mentally ill person, an abused person who believes themselves to be Joker, as if they saw the Joker on TV and just hallucinated themselves to be the Joker. And I promise this has something to do with my greater thoughts of politics and media and how important it is, because what really made Joker 1 even good? And it goes back to how people were about Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad, people were like, okay, I like this movie that it's in the sense that it's boring. It's not what I wanted it to be, but I liked the Joker aspect of it. That was a big thing. People liked Jared Leto's Joker. You can say anything about his scandals. That I'm talking about the content of his Joker. And people, basically started calling him cringe Leto Joker. But the biggest thing about Suicide Squad was people's biggest gripe about it was that it did not have enough Joker. That the Joker was not in it enough, and that was people's problem with the aspects of Joker. And then once we start moving into where the media sets in, and that's the point, you had your content creators, you had your alternative media structure, which is more or less the media nowadays. That's what I'm going to get into with this video. They basically said, look how profound the Joker movie is, and it became a political tool where people were like, we don't want incel rhetoric basically to be out there and expressed in a favorable light where you should be sympathetic. So it became political. But if you really can't say that the Joker movie is Joker at all. You take it without the context of Joker. You may at best have somebody that's like, what is this? Is kind of like a nod to the, Joker. It would be more like a nod to the Joker than it is anything, and it just doesn't represent him well. And it goes into my greater point about God of War and how basically every time that Kratos has come out since God of War 2, Sony Santa Monica Studios told people Kratos is now deep. He's now revolutionized in how you should think about him. He's deep, he's compassionate, he's full of sorrow, and he's still rage-filled, but he's got some sort of pathos to him. And it's like they did that same thing for God of War 2, 3, and 4. I'm surprised they didn't do it with Lao Fei, the Fei game. I'm surprised they didn't say, Kratos' wife is what makes Kratos finally deep. I know that's hard for them to do now that they went Norse and they've made him an intentionally soft dad of the Sony caliber that they're known for now. The Last of Us, Logan type movie that's strong in the Sony ecosystem for story-based, single player games. This trend of dads who have a tragic reality that they live through. But it's only good because it's Kratos, and Kratos, with the Loom of Fate, I expressed this in my video, and I want you to check that out instead of focusing it on this one. Media has made people believe things time and time again. The whole idea of the gamer is, and this goes for anybody who's a fan of movies, music, you're a fan of it because the system that you think you have outsmarted with its own propaganda has convinced you of something. That's what's so important about it. They know you so much. These people who studied with the Brain Initiative under Obama and these almost, if not $1 trillion altogether with assets and associations anyway, billion-dollar high-tier corporations, okay? They spend countless amounts of dollars, millions and millions upon millions of dollars to learn how you function, to learn what makes you tick. They buy your data, which if you have smart devices such as a watch, it calculates when you're stressed out and stuff. I mean, they don't lie to you about that. A lot of things are not conveniently expressed. It's like the power of propaganda in media is the whole entire point of my video. You really severely underestimate what goes into making you believe what you believe and how either upset or happy you get upon anything. Like for God of War, it came out and people were happy and they got convinced that Kratos is finally deep now. Several times. They convinced people, excuse me. They convinced people over and over again with each new God of War that Kratos is finally deep and, he's finally got shit down. And the Santa Monica Studios, Sony, literally peddles that out every game. That's what I'm saying. I am very surprised they didn't even do it with Valhalla, the DLC, just because, or Ragnarok, because they did it for every fucking God of War game. Kratos is finally deep now. And that's the narrative they go with. And the same thing about the Joker movie. Both the positive and negative reception it got and was in preparation for, say, the media calling it an incel material, it's incel bait and dog whistles. It doesn't change the fact that as it stands, that's not really a DC movie at all. It's a mentally ill person who basically wears clown makeup and kills someone. And that's the point. The power of perception of the media before you even purchase something, before you even buy it. People begin to have false assumptions about how things work because they'll watch a content creator who's, when I say somebody's got a motive or an agenda, I mean it in the strictest sense that sponsors might provide the avenue in which materials are made. Sponsors, or how ad revenue and how video plays and clicks. People admit this all the time. They will go for more fringe subjects just because it gets them more views. And because that's their motive, or because the algorithm says this or that, and how media plays with handlers. I mean, people remember Brittany Venti, the alt-right, alternative media, e-girl. You look on her Twitter page, she's got a handle. That's just one of my examples because I was looking into content creators. We give these people such so much amount of our time, and we either look at them as if at face value, or we look at them too low IQ and conspiratorial and think that they fit within the monolith of our own preconceived notions and our own prejudices at any given time. And that's so important. The media. It's why I personally believe voting is really inefficient and pointless right now, because if a tree falls in the forest and you're not around to hear it, you know what I mean? Does it make a sound? It's the point that I'm making is you don't know how many people have come in the last few decades from both Republican and Democrat within the United States came out against, for example, the Israeli lobby. There's no anti-Semitism. There's no hatred for them as peoples or Jews, but the mere political influence of the pro-Israeli lobby, merely mentioning that back in the early 2000s, basically got several people, both Republican and Democrat. Like, for example, there was a black representative. I can't remember his name now. And he basically said, look, I got, and it was so. They documentedly in the media tied him to Osama bin Laden in the World Trade Center attack, and basically that he was glorifying it. And he lost his recumbency, or he lost going back in. There was the case of Stone Mountain, Georgia's, what does Israel have to do with Stone Mountain, Georgia, the father of Cynthia McKinney, who openly came out as a whistleblower on TV and on Press TV and stuff, and Free Press TV, and said, like, basically, the Israeli lobby makes me, makes us sign a contract and swear oath so that we get funding, swear loyalty so that we talk about these things and do that, and we get our money from our constituency. And you can't serve the natural base of the United States, and that's the power of media and perception. Just knowing that there happens to just so happen to be a strong element of Jewish nature immediately gives people that have unethical, like I guess you could say, disingenuous intentions will blanket term the Jews, and that's something that certain radical aspects of Messianic flavored Judaism like Chabad Lubavitch and other Talmud-based doctrine, and they depend upon that for their own radical nature. And when people don't educate themselves on the true natures of the topics that they hear about every day from the algorithm that they're fed, they get a false narrative from people like Alexander Dugin, the people of people like him from the Russian narratives that, this is the real element of Russian espionage. The fact that these people will pay money to influencers, and you will find them spreading ideas that are pro-Russian in the sense of pro-Putin. They are ironically, they're pro-Third Reich, and they're anti-Jew, typically as a monolith in Israel. And that's a very dangerous aspect to go on in life, because truth be told, media has such a profound impact on what people believe in ways that they don't perceive it. You think when you go to school and you learn about propaganda like bandwagoning and things of that nature, there are C-SPAN books. I have one in my Kindle library, talking about how media and influences from propaganda influence politics. That there's actual studies done by criminal watchdogs who basically understand that by metrics of population, for example, white people are more often harassed by law enforcement. That's just by the statistical likelihood that white people are just more present. 15% or 13%, 50% of all violent crime. These are valid things to say without hating, for example, the Negroid race, the black race. There's nothing wrong with being black, but there's nothing wrong with being white. And we have been conditioned to where we can't even have civil conversations about things that are documented because people get so uppity, for example, over the N-word. I made that an effort in my comedy that's on Rumble, and check that out. You can go to lnk.bio//KXNGMAJORA, but that's my website if you want to see my gaming. But I go the extra mile, the extra step to add controversy into certain elements of what I do, because people have been so severely socially engineered and conditioned to where they cannot fire the proper synapses and fire the neurons in their brain. The neurotransmitters won't fire right. And for some reason, it just ends up being that we come to faulty conclusions, and then there are predatory groups on the internet and beyond with special interests and lobbies who dedicate time to learn psychology of people and study their metadata and everything they can find from internet cookies and trackers and all of the compiled data that's not just going to law enforcement with things like the flock cameras. People just be buying the data. Corporations will be buying the data and feeding them into their own AI agents, and they learn a lot about you. The government, it's not just the government. We always have this like fish-eyed closed lens about, basically if the government's the only thing we got to worry about, or some sort of tyrannical mega corporation. It can be any fucking person can go on the internet and get some data packets from you for enough money, and they know enough about you because you're just so, typically, and I don't mean you as the person watching, you might actually have everything going for you, but if you don't, understand where your credentials are on your Android or Apple device, know who would be likely to see you. When they say cookies, a lot of people just accept it, or they accept some, and they think that it's necessary, and then they end up getting spied on by people and they don't even realize it. And this all gets crunched into things with like data from, for example, the C-SPAN material. People are literally, we are like a little social experiment. I talk a lot about non-human intelligence, aliens and UFOs and the paranormal side of things, but you'd be surprised what our own government and people are able to do as just everyday people who decide to commit to just really eccentric surveillance state nonsense to sell and buy products and to be the beneficiaries of making such deals happen. The whole idea that a website has to... Okay, I wanted to reformulate what I was saying. We have been conditioned as people because of where people centralize their existence and digital footprint on the internet. We have been, I guess, conditioned and socially engineered to the point where we take a website, a social media website, and we will seriously advocate and commit to activism over the fact that they should be constitutionally protected institutions and public utilities, because normies got on the internet. I've made several videos about this. Normies got on the internet because of money and popularity and the nature of memes becoming relevant and everything else. And they don't understand that that's still a website. Just because you as a normie and the normie invasion of the internet, where everyday people are now functioning, you feel that just because this is where we're all aggregating as people, that it should be a constitutional right and seen as the public square. You are clearly delusional, because I'm not just being somebody who's siding with the technocratic elite. These people tend to be very disingenuous, malignant entities who tend to have some sort of functions with government or multinationals. But it doesn't change the fact that, these are private-owned websites. Just because this is where we communicate now, humans can magically not do it. It's not really likely. Obviously I understand this more than anybody. I'm a kid who grew up with the internet, Newgrounds, E-Bombs World, Funny Junk, the forums. As a young kid at like 5-6 years old, as a very young kid, I'm putting on Bonzi Buddy. I explained this, the spyware, just typing text-to-speech to learn how to comprehend advanced language. And, I understood the culture that I was with and the nature of how the internet functions truly. Even if it's in modern day, it still has its very fundamental natures that still act the same. Terms and service may be dystopian, okay? And I know that the governments of various places like the United Kingdom and the United States have been really weird about access and identification, but that has something to do with Agenda ID 2020 and things of smart cities. But what I'm saying is these are still websites, people. I'm not just saying that to be the bearer of a bad opinion, but they really are still websites. Take it from someone who's been on the internet his whole life as a 30-year-old now, and born 1995. I got to see the aspects of the Wild West internet, and these websites like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, they still are the functions of websites owned by multinational corporations. And fair point, it is theirs. It may be where we speak. It may be where we are. But that does not change the fact that they are privately owned websites. This is the power I keep speaking of through this whole video to wrap it all up. The power of perception and media. Watching your favorite content creator basically doesn't even have to have a conspiratorial lens or some form of, malintent. It could be just by the nature of their beast, that they have to basically formulate an agenda that's on an unconscious level that gatekeeps the true conversation and orients it towards popular trends. And you could say that that's normal, and it's like, for normal people, but you don't understand what made the internet what it is today. Rest upon the unique nature of art and the edgy natures therein. And because normal people have gotten onto the internet, they cannot jive correctly with how propaganda and psyops and trolling has completely, overwritten their minds. I mean, boomers are on the internet talking about they can't distinguish between artificial intelligence anymore. And this is more and more to where I'm saying people really need to understand motives. You need to understand that you are constantly being psyoped by people that don't even have to be like an Illuminati conspiracy, but an interest that may just be to the nature of their business. So, like the corporation. And if you don't understand just the severity and the nuance of the psyop you go through every day, that you are being propagandized to and manipulated by media on such a severe level that things you don't even connect to politics and media and propaganda are completely influenced by media, politics, and propaganda and the real politic of basically the terminally online culture. And we have become a peoples and a society universally from first world to third world that cannot often distinguish concepts and identities and how we formulate them, and how we are bombarded with psyops on the internet every day. How Rockefeller had influenced just how we function, how the academia, mental cleanliness, mental hygiene, and, philanthropy of these types like Carnegie and Ford, and, all of these people getting together to make workers, not thinkers. And now that we're becoming thinkers, school becoming a thing of questionable obsolete now with the artificial intelligence, we need to think about the gatekeepers of academia, how much we trust them, and the narratives and psyops that go along with it every day. You need to question the motives, the financials, and why people would just naturally do things without it being Illuminati conspiracy, but human nature. That's about all. Peace out.